from West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Support for the Legislature Today is provided by the following.
The West Virginia Higher Education Policy Commission, working with students and families to improve college access and student success for a better West Virginia.
Good evening, I'm Andrea Lanham, and this is the Legislature Today from the Capitol in Charleston. For State House followers, some noteworthy action here already, and it's only day 3 of the session. From chocolate kisses replacing last year's platter of manure, to a senator resigning today, to the Chief Justice's appearances before lawmakers today, we'll break it all down in just a few minutes. But first, can everyone get along? Dave Misich takes a look at Governor Jim Justice's party switch, the contentious final hours of last year's session, and what lingers as the 2018 session gets underway.
Let me just say this to you as bluntly as I can say it. West Virginia, at the altar, when we had it done, like it or not like it, but the Democrats walked away from me.
Governor Jim Justice announced he was switching parties and would once again be a Republican at a rally for Donald Trump in Huntington last August.
Today I would tell you with lots of prayers and lots of thinking. Today I'll tell you as West Virginians, I can't help you anymore being a Democrat governor.
Although Justice ran for office and won as a Democrat, he spent his campaign saying he has a close relationship to Trump. And once in office, he said the two of them had continued to discuss how to bring West Virginia out of a slumping economy, and particularly how to get coal miners back to work. As expected, many Democrats in the legislature took aim at Justice, saying his party switch was motivated by Trump's popularity in the state and a change in the political tide during the course of recent years. But as for Justice's claim that the Democrats walked away from him, House Minority Leader Tim Miley says that just isn't true.
Look, I don't care what Governor Justice tells people. He didn't switch from Democrat to Republican because of anything that happened here in our state capitol. He switched because he likes Donald Trump. He wants Donald Trump to like him, and the best way to make that happen is to be more like Donald Trump, i.e., become a Republican. But that's neither here nor there, because whether he's a Democrat or Republican, we will support his policies if they are good, sound, fundamental policies that move West Virginia forward.
Trump aside, the dynamics toward the end of the last legislative session give some insight as to how things might play out this year. Senate Minority Leader Roman Prezioso says the Democrats had supported Justice's agenda as the session rolled along, but a last-minute tax reform proposal on the final night changed things.
In the last 2 hours of the regular session, he completely jumped ship, turned towards new issues, tax reform that gave, breaks to the rich, not the middle class that we need to target. And we just, at that point, we said no, we weren't going to do that. That wasn't part of the plan that we'd worked on for 59 days.
Prezioso is referring to a bill that would have increased the consumer sales and gas taxes while lowering state income taxes, among other things. However, Prezioso says Justice's efforts on the measure left legislators with little time to review the bill, and what they could understand of it on such short notice ran counter to the fundamental principles of the Democratic Party.
We knew that more the upper class, the people that had means, received more of a tax break. We didn't have the specifics on, how it all broke out. We were working with general terms that it was very clearly that we saw that it wasn't benefiting the working class people of West Virginia.
That tax reform proposal proved to be a moment that showed a budding relationship between Justice and Republicans, at least some of them. Despite being from opposite parties at the time, Justice announced late on the final day of session that he had struck a deal on the bill with Senate President Mitch Carmichael. Although the proposal failed, Carmichael says since then his relationship with the governor has improved further, which he attributes, in part, to Justice's party switch.
We even feel a closer relationship with the governor now because, yes, he made the switch to come back to the Republican roots because he saw, and I think what the people of West Virginia see also, is that the principles of the Republican Party are what now have energized West Virginia to move forward. And the people are tired of being last place in so many of the different rankings and economic categories and so forth.
But Carmichael's strengthened relationship with the governor stood in contrast to that of the Republican leadership in the House in the dramatic final hours of 2017's legislative session. While Senate Republicans and Justice seemed to have won one another over, there appeared to be little to no cooperation from the lower chamber on the tax reform bill, effectively killing it as midnight on day 60 approached. As 2018's legislative session gets underway, House Speaker Tim Armstead acknowledges there were some differences last session between his caucus and Governor Justice.
I think we felt that we were trying throughout the session to find those areas of common ground, but there were certainly some areas of contention, and I didn't think those should be personal, but there were certainly policy differences, and so when we got to the end of the session and we got into the whole debate and into the special session about the tax reform proposals, it was clear to me that there was not support for those proposals in the House delegates in the format that they were. So we were trying to find areas of common ground within those proposals that we could move forward on.
Coming into this session, though, Armstead remains hopeful that his and the majority party's relationship with Justice has changed for the better. However, he says his optimism has less to do with party and more to do with now open lines of communication.
I'm optimistic that we're going to, because I do think those lines of discussion have been opened. In terms of the party switch, what I said at the time applies again today, and that is that our caucus and the Republican caucus feel like we were elected by the people of West Virginia, and given this historic opportunity after 80 years of being in the minority, the people of West Virginia put us in the majority because there were certain things they wanted us to accomplish. And we want to do those things. We want to follow through on our commitment on those issues that are very important to the people of West Virginia.
Joining me now are journalist Brad McElhenney of Metro News and senior reporter for West Virginia Public Broadcasting, Dave Mistich. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Now, Dave, you reached out to the governor's office as late as today.
That's right. I reached out to them to get comment on this particular story. Obviously, a lot of criticisms in there, particularly from the Democrats. Also, you heard from Tim Armstead about some of the struggles they had through the House, in the House, as far as their relationship with the governor's office on the final day. But they did not get back to me. So, but that's what we've seen a lot of this particular governor.
So often the governor is he's different from other governors in many ways. One of which is he still makes his life in Greenbrier County, and so he's off-site among residents of his community, still managing the affairs of governance. But his staff is in touch with him, but not always face to face. And the other thing is he very clearly speaks for himself in his own voice, and it's hard to predict what he may say. So I think what you may be getting is a deference to the way the governor may describe himself and his own relationships.
Right, and I think that kind of goes to show about the party switch too, as well. I mean, he was a Republican, he became a Democrat, got elected back to being a Republican. I think that that different type of governor thing is pretty spot on. So.
Now, it's been an interesting few days here in the legislature. We started out day one with Delegate Wilson's motion to unseat the Speaker of the House.
Right. Pretty surprised, right?
You don't often see that on the first day. The first day, I came in, I don't know about you guys, but I came in expecting it's going to be largely ceremonial. The big event of the day is going to be the State of the State address, some formalities, and then all of a sudden you've got this procedural bomb thrown into the mix of things.
Right, and as it turned out, they tabled that motion. It didn't go anywhere. We all know that Armstead is still Speaker. There obviously wasn't a challenge to that at all.
And it wasn't just a surprise to us, it was a surprise to Delegate Wilson's fellow delegates, including some of the people he might be most likely to vote with. Some of the folks from the Liberty Caucus who vote very similarly with Wilson, said, we never knew. If you're going to have a successful revolt, why don't you tell someone?
Right. I mean, Delegate Folk of that Liberty Caucus referred to it as bizarre. He said that they had no knowledge, him and Pat McGeehan over there in the House, Delegate McGeehan, neither of them had any knowledge of that at all. And they even, acknowledged that they vote with him often, or that Wilson votes with them very often. As it turns out, he was removed from the Small Business and Economic Development Committee, as well as the Veterans Affairs and Homeland Security Committee, but they left him on House Education, which I thought was really interesting. Did you get a chance to talk to anyone about why they left him there at all, or?
Well, I suppose you don't take away everything, because if the same series of events is repeated, you got to leave something to still be taken away, right?
Right.
Now, on the second day, we had Delegate Pushkin, and he introduced another resolution to look into the, impeachment process of Chief Justice Lawfrey.
Right, and we've heard a lot about that before. We've heard a lot about a constitutional amendment that would bring the Supreme Court's budget underneath the legislature's review. Pushkin's resolution is a little bit harsher than that, I think that we could say, going as far as looking into the possibility of impeachment. We have a clip of that, if we could air that now.
The biggest casualty in all of this is public trust and confidence in the judiciary has eroded throughout this whole thing. And in op-eds and in statements to the press, all we have gotten so far from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is a shift of the blame. He wants to blame it on the former administrator. He has taken no responsibility and no accountability for what's gone on under his watch and in his office and in his home while he's been Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So I believe it's our constitutional responsibility as an equal branch of government to be that check against the irresponsible activities that have gone on under this court. So I have drafted, and I'm going to introduce a resolution that would direct the House Judiciary Committee to inquire, investigate, and report back recommendations on whether or not the impeachment of Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Alan Lawfrey, would be an appropriate course of action to take.
Well, what you just heard, as you guys know, was a theme that's been running throughout the session already. And it all began with stories about the Supreme Court spending, the expensive $32,000 couch, the inlaid wooden floor. There was other furniture bought by other Supreme Court justices, desks that moved from the Capitol to people's homes. And so the legislature, in a bipartisan way, because they're looking at a separate branch of government, is pretty upset about this. So you see Pushkin, a Democrat, pushing for impeachment, but you've also seen the legislative auditor say we're going to audit the Supreme Court, and today you saw a pretty contentious budget meeting with the Supreme Court's budget being looked at. So whether the political theater you saw from Pushkin goes forward or not, there's a multi-pronged approach to outrage over the spending in the Supreme Court.
Right. I asked Majority Leader Coles about this over in the House, and he said that he doesn't think there's much traction for what Pushkin's pushing for. As far as a constitutional amendment in the House, I think that's been introduced. I believe that was Delegate Folk over in the House. And I feel like, especially over there at least, that's still an option, but they are not opposed to other mechanisms on how to get there, from what I can tell. So it's not just a constitutional amendment to get some oversight of the Supreme Court's budget at this point. So
on the impeachment issues, there's a couple reasons it might not go forward. As much as some of the Republican majority might be interested, one reason is there was more than one justice, not just Justice Lawfrey, involved with these spending questions. So it's hard to target the impeachment. The other issue is it would probably go through the Judiciary Committee, and frankly, a lot of the people on that committee are lawyers who may have to go before the Supreme Court.
Right. I've actually heard that from a couple of lawmakers already.
Yeah.
So.
And the Majority Leader also mentioned today he had a few other ideas as far as the constitutional amendment goes that doesn't just, like you said, it doesn't just focus on bringing the Supreme Court's budget under the legislature's control.
Right. They talked about putting them under purchasing. I think there's a bill that they're talking about already with the Department of Administration, reworking some of that. There's a whole list of things that they're looking at, but this is an issue that's going to stay relevant, I think, for some time, and we'll probably see some action on it, altogether.
Majority Leader Coles was talking about these sort of partial measures that wouldn't go as far as a constitutional amendment, and both he as the Majority Leader and Chief Justice Lawfrey seem to think that these are possibilities that could go forward with. But you and I were in the same conversation with Darrell Coles, and he said, but I'd really prefer to go ahead with the amendment.
Right. It should be pointed out that I believe that he's supported this in the past, long before these reports came out. So he's been interested in this particular issue for some time, long before the $32,000 couch was ever heard of. So.
And we actually have a clip from that earlier Finance Committee with Lawfrey presenting to House Finance.
Well, there is a lot of public pressure from this body to do something, because I don't think you would dispute that it was outrageous. There were a lot of claims. I mean, the average taxpayer, they're outraged from what was reported. So we want to make sure that there are some safeguards or assurances that this will not happen again.
I think that is an absolutely legitimate concern and question. There is nobody more outraged by these purchases than me. Many people in this room have known me for more than 2 decades, and they know that I would have never approved of such things. However, there was clearly a failure of oversight at the court. These things happened. We can't go back and change them, but what we can do is go forward and make sure that something like this never happens again.
And this is something that the legislature is definitely going to look into from here on out. We know that this is something legislative leaders have expressed interest in.
Right. From both parties, too.
And already resolutions in both houses potentially to go forward with a constitutional amendment, which we, the citizens, may get to vote on.
Now, we also had the State of the State address earlier this week, and a lot of people have said that it's a little unconventional. I know that you've reported on a lot of the props that he's used in the past.
Yeah, and I mean, this year was, it was almost like bookends. It was callbacks to the props from last year. The Frankenstein monster.
Michigan.
Michigan, yes. Whiteboards, and, and platters with a mysterious substance beneath them. And this time it was a twist, right?
Right. It's a Hershey Kiss.
Yeah, rather than the substance of the past,
right,
it was Hershey Kisses. It was sweet, and we had Roman Precioso on the earlier bit, and he seemed very pleased by getting the Hershey Kiss instead.
We also had some references that came back to, like the Frankenstein impression and that.
Yeah, and the governor's point of view in bringing all these callbacks was that we've come so far in a year. It was doom and gloom and tax increases last year to try to get the budget under control. And this year he was saying, look, we've really turned the corner already, and I can afford to offer you a Hershey Kiss instead of what was before. I feel like Frankenstein's monster is alive now rather than on the operating table as he was last year. So a lot of theatrics, again, from the governor, but toward a different message.
Right. I mean, one of the things I noticed too, and I think we heard this early, but not as heavily as we did on Wednesday night, is just this this idea of him as coach of West Virginia. I mean, he referred to himself that he wanted to be referred to as coach. That's how he sees himself.
And we've heard that his real life basketball team came in to get the message across.
Right, and that was sort of the finale, was like the cheer at the end, so.
There's some irony to that, though, because I appreciate his claim to be a coach, and he truly is in real life, but the coach was at odds with his teammates last year.
Right.
Both the Democrats and the Republicans fighting all year long, just trying to get this budget in place.
And this year we have a little bit more optimistic view of the budget, at least according to Dave Hardy, who's the revenue secretary. They presented their 6-year plan to the finance committees this week.
Right. It's certainly not as gloomy as it was last year.
No, and I think that there's kind of a consensus that the state economy has improved a bit, and the revenue picture for the state has improved a bit. But the question is, how much and how far into the future can we depend on that?
And I know Democrats had had responded to that as well, saying that maybe the numbers are a little bit better, but we do need to be a little bit more cautious about this too.
The governor being the governor, he wants to do some spending again. Some raises for state employees, which are overdue. Some spending for Department of Commerce, spending on tourism, some other this and that the governor wants to do. The Democrats, talking about the party switch, the Democrats said, we like a lot of these spending priorities, potentially free community college or subsidized community college, but it's a little bit of a switch. The Democrats were expressing caution on the spending and where the budget is, whereas the Republicans seem fairly accepting that there's a little bit of money to play with this year.
Right. One of the things about all of that too is they also, in the State of the State, you mentioned this business inventory tax cuts. I think that there's a lot of Democrats out there that are wondering, things look good for now, but in the long term, is that affordable? And I think that's a question that we're hopefully going to get answers to as the session rolls along. I think that that's going to be probably a big concern, is to what degree are tax cuts and increased spending affordable with the shape that things have been in the past coming into now.
The Democrats have been through that experience, and it was under their majority, but business taxes, a couple of different phases of business taxes were reduced, and shortly after that, we had problems with severance tax, and we saw this almost budget collapse. So they're expressing this caution. And they're also talking about priorities. They're talking about, maybe they also don't like this property tax for businesses, maybe think that it hinders business growth, but you're looking at that and making hard choices between that and maybe bigger raises for state employees. Their priorities would probably be different.
And we also have the increase of tourism, like you guys had referenced, and it seems like legislative leadership is a little bit more accepting of that this year. Do you guys get that impression?
I haven't heard too much about it personally, but
the tourism increase is a fairly ambitious increase. It's from
more than
$6 million
times.
to about $20 million. And the governor describes not doing so as being penny wise and pound foolish. The commerce investment, which is meant to encourage businesses to come here, to have some site-ready property where you can, when time may be of an essence to lure a business. Last year, the governor wanted more. He wanted $105 million. This year, it's $35 million. So in comparison, that looks pretty reasonable.
Yeah, it's been a little bit scaled back since last year, for sure.
Yeah, and the Commerce Secretary, Woody Thrasher, who people have a pretty good deal of confidence in, has spent the past year preaching the virtues of how this money might be spent.
And we don't have too much time left, but what is on your radar here for the rest of the session? Is there anything that you're particularly interested in that you think is going to be really big coming up?
I think we've covered a couple of the things. The Supreme Court, what they're going to do with that, the business inventory tax, where that's going to go. I'm also hearing rumblings around the Capitol and just outside of it that there might be a constitutional amendment about abortion and Medicaid spending on that. So those are the things I've got my eye on. So
our focus has been so much on the budget the last couple of years, and I was going to say, I think this may be the year that you get some social issues. For one thing, it's an election year, but secondly, that I also have heard that this potential amendment that may deal with the taxpayer funding of abortions for those who receive Medicaid may be something that the legislature puts forth. Also, reorganization of Department of Health and Human Resources, which is a huge agency, and anytime you try to reorganize an agency of that size, people are clearly going to be affected. It's going to be controversial, and I think that may be something that takes on life as a controversial topic here.
These are all really interesting issues, and it's something that we're definitely going to follow here as the session progresses. Thank you guys so much for joining me here tonight.
Thanks.
Thank you.
That will do it for us here at the Capitol this week. Join us again Monday as Senate President and House Speaker both join us. You can catch the Legislature Today weeknights at 6 on radio, television, and online, and watch an encore on television each night at 11 or on the West Virginia channel at 7. For everyone here at the Legislature Today, thanks for watching and have a great weekend.
Bye.